When I bought a peaceful lake property, I thought I'd finally found calm. But my neighbor, the HOA's queen herself, decided my lake was hers. From fake fines to trespassing, she pushed me too far. So I built a fence, right through her backyard line. You know how sometimes, after years of grinding and city noise, your soul just craves silence? That was me. I'd spent too long surrounded by concrete, deadlines, and chaos. I wanted something different, something alive, something that didn't buzz, honk, or vibrate with stress. I wanted the sound of water instead of traffic, the sight of trees instead of towers. And after months of searching, I found it. A small, forgotten lake just outside a quiet town. The kind of place where time slows down and the air smells like freedom. The moment I saw it, I knew. The lake was glassy and still, framed by pines that leaned toward their reflections like old friends. A few birds skimmed across the water's surface, leaving perfect ripples behind them. There was no noise except wind and water. No rules, no neighbors, just peace. I stood there for a long while, breathing it in, feeling my pulse finally sync with something calmer than city life. The property listing called it a lakeside parcel, but that didn't do it justice. It wasn't huge, just enough for a small cabin, a dock, maybe a little boat. But it felt like the world was mine. The land wrapped around nearly half the lake, giving me the best view at sunset. And the best part? It was private property. The paperwork was clean, the deed was clear, and I'd officially own a slice of the shoreline. At least that's what I thought. When I went to sign the final papers, the real estate agent mentioned something offhand. Oh, by the way, the north side of the lake is bordered by a residential community, an HOA. I didn't think much of it. I figured they'd stay on their side, I'd stay on mine. After all, there was a clear boundary line. Different plots, different owners. Simple, right? But life has a funny way of showing you that simple doesn't mean peaceful. After closing the deal, I spent the next few weeks fixing up the cabin and restoring the old dock. It was paradise. I'd wake up to mist floating over the water, coffee in hand, watching fish jump near the surface. No noise, no rules, no stress. Just the calm I'd been searching for. At least until the day I saw her. She was standing across the property line. Sunglasses, clipboard, the kind of posture that screamed authority nobody asked for. She waved, smiled, and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Karen, head of the HOA." It was one of those moments that seemed small at first, just a polite hello. But looking back, that greeting wasn't a welcome, it was a warning. And that's when I realized, peace might have brought me here, but it wouldn't keep me here for long. The first time Karen showed up on my side of the lake, I thought it was a mistake. I was cleaning leaves off the dock when I heard that familiar voice from behind the trees. Sharp, cheerful, and just a little too loud. "Oh, good. You're out here. I wanted to talk about the lake." I turned, and there she was again, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of authority. Even from a distance, she had that kind of posture that said she was used to being obeyed. She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that says, "I'm about to tell you how things work around here." She pointed toward the lake. "You know, we really appreciate that you're keeping it clean. Our residents love this area. It's practically our community lake." I blinked. "Community lake?" "Yes," she said with a little laugh as if it were obvious. "Our HOA maintains it. The families across the North Shore use it for fishing, barbecues, all that. You'll fit right in. Just make sure to read the HOA guidelines before you do any modifications." Now at that point I didn't want trouble, so I just nodded. "Thanks for the info," I said politely. "But this land, and the lake section attached to it, is privately owned. My deed includes the water rights." That's when her smile faltered. For a second, just a flicker, but I saw it. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Then, with practiced charm, she said, "Oh, there must be some confusion. I'll check with the board. We have everything mapped out, so I'm sure it'll be clear soon." She walked away with that same smile, waving as if she'd just done me a favor. But the moment she turned, her expression changed. Cold, tight. That was the exact second I knew. She wasn't confused. She was territorial. Over the next few days, I started noticing strange little things. A few HOA members walking around near the edge of my property, pretending to be checking for litter. A sign appeared by the lake entrance, "Private HOA area, members only." I stood there staring at it for a good minute, speechless. The sign wasn't on their side. It was halfway across mine. The next morning, I found Karen standing on the dock with another man, holding a rolled-up map. She didn't even look surprised to see me. "Oh, hi," she said, waving again. "Just verifying property lines. The board wants to make sure the lake stays protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. She smiled again. "From misuse. You know, sometimes new residents don't realize they're part of our community." I could feel the edge in her words. Every syllable was dipped in condescension. I stayed calm, though. I told her I had the official land survey and deed. I even offered to show it to her. Right there. She declined, brushing off the offer with a hand wave. "I'll handle it with the HOA," she said. "We have a process." That was the second time I saw that flicker in her expression. The microsecond where control slipped and irritation peeked through. Over the next week, she made her presence impossible to ignore. She'd show up whenever I was outside, pretending to check on landscaping rules. She asked about my plans for the dock, whether I'd registered it with the community. She even commented on the color of my cabin. "You know," she said one afternoon, "we have specific guidelines for exterior paint. Just something to keep in mind if you want to blend in." I wanted to laugh. Blend in? I didn't move here to match her fences and manicured lawns. I moved here to get away from people who think they own peace and sell it in monthly dues. But I kept my calm. I always do, because people like Karen, they thrive on reaction. They feed on control, and I wasn't going to give her either. Still, something told me this wasn't just about rules or aesthetics. It was about power. She was the queen bee of her HOA hive, and I had just moved into her line of sight. She didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as a problem she hadn't yet solved. And if I knew one thing from that first week, it was this. Karen wasn't going to stop until she reminded me exactly whose lake she thought this was. It started with footprints. One morning, I walked down to the dock and saw them, muddy shoe prints leading across the grass, straight from the HOA side of the lake onto my property. I followed the trail, and sure enough, it led right to my dock. Karen's little white dog had left a few paw prints too, circling around where I'd left my fishing gear the night before. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe she'd just cut across for a walk. No big deal. I told myself not to overreact. But then it happened again, and again. Every morning, fresh tracks, new trash, random snack wrappers near the water. One day I saw her. She was strolling along the edge of the lake like she owned it, her dog off leash, walking right past the private property sign I'd just installed. I called out, "Hey, you're on my side." She didn't even slow down. She just waved her hand in the air, dismissive. "Oh, don't worry. We all use the lake path. It's community property." Community property. Those two words echoed in my head like an insult. I took a deep breath, walked closer, and kept my tone calm. "Actually, this section isn't part of the HOA. I own this parcel outright. I have the land survey and title." Karen laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a condescending one. "Well, I'll have to double-check that," she said. "You know how these maps can be. Confusing." And with that, she just kept walking, her little dog trotting behind her like it was the most normal thing in the world. That's when I realized this wasn't ignorance. It was entitlement. She knew what she was doing, and she was daring me to stop her. A few days later, the situation escalated. I came home from a supply run and noticed something new near the water. A shiny metal sign hammered right into the soil by the shore. It read, "HOA property. Lakefront access for residents only." It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even accurate. And the worst part? The sign was on my land. I stood there staring at it, trying to process the absurdity. I walked over, checked the spot against my survey markers. Sure enough, it was planted 2 full meters inside my property line. That's when I decided I wasn't going to play nice anymore. I grabbed my phone. took pictures of the sign from every angle, zoomed in on the HOA logo, and filed everything neatly into a folder labeled Evidence Karen. Later that evening, I knocked on Karen's door. She opened it with that same fake smile. "Hello, neighbor," she chirped. I held up the photo on my phone. "You know anything about this?" Her smile twitched. "Oh, that? The board probably put it up to avoid confusion. We wouldn't want visitors trespassing, would we?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "Visitors aren't the problem, Karen. Trespassers are." Her smile disappeared entirely then. She didn't have a response. Just crossed her arms and said, "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "No," I replied, calm but firm. "You're making it illegal." And then I walked away. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window looking out at the lake reflecting the moonlight, wondering how far she'd go. I wasn't angry and not yet. Mostly I was disappointed. I'd bought this land to find peace, not to fight with someone who measured her self-worth by imaginary borders. Still, something inside me shifted that night. The quiet kind of resolve that builds when you realize someone is testing your patience just to see how much you'll take. I decided that from then on, every word, every visit, every incident would be recorded. No shouting matches, no drama, just documentation. If Karen wanted a boundary dispute, she was going to get one, but it would be fought on paper with facts, not emotion, because I knew one thing for sure. When someone like her picks a fight with peace, they never expect peace to fight back. After that first boundary clash, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd get the message. But if anything, it seemed to fuel her. Karen wasn't just nosy. She was strategic, the kind of person who didn't argue to win. She argued to dominate. "You know," she said one afternoon, "we have specific guidelines for exterior paint. Just something to keep in mind if you want to blend in." I wanted to laugh. Blend in? I didn't move here to match her fences and manicured lawns. I moved here to get away from people who think they own peace and sell it in monthly dues. But I kept my calm. I always do. Because people like Karen, they thrive on reaction. They feed on control, and I wasn't going to give her either. Still, something told me this wasn't just about rules or aesthetics. It was about power. She was the queen bee of her HOA hive, and I had just moved into her line of sight. She didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as a problem she hadn't yet solved. And if I knew one thing from that first week, it was this. Karen wasn't going to stop until she reminded me exactly whose lake she thought this was. It started with footprints. One morning, I walked down to the dock and saw them. Muddy shoe prints leading across the grass, straight from the HOA side of the lake onto my property. I followed the trail and sure enough, it led right to my dock. Karen's little white dog had left a few paw prints too, circling around where I'd left my fishing gear the night before. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe she'd just cut across for a walk. No big deal. I told myself not to overreact. But then it happened again, and again. Every morning, fresh tracks, new trash, random snack wrappers near the water. One day I saw her. She was strolling along the edge of the lake like she owned it, her dog off-leash, walking right past the private property sign I'd just installed. I called out, "Hey, you're on my side." She didn't even slow down. She just waved her hand in the air, dismissive. "Oh, don't worry. We all use the lake path. It's community property." Community property. Those two words echoed in my head like an insult. I took a deep breath, walked closer, and kept my tone calm. "Actually, this section isn't part of the HOA. I own this parcel outright. I have the land survey and title." Karen laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a condescending one. "Well, I'll have to double-check that," she said. "You know how these maps can be confusing." And with that, she just kept walking, her little dog trotting behind her like it was the most normal thing in the world. That's when I realized this wasn't ignorance. It was entitlement. She knew what she was doing, and she was daring me to stop her. A few days later, the situation escalated. I came home from a supply run and noticed something new near the water. A shiny metal sign hammered right into the soil by the shore. It read, "HOA property, lakefront access for residents only." It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even accurate. And the worst part? The sign was on my land. I stood there staring at it, trying to process the absurdity. I walked over, checked the spot against my survey markers. Sure enough, it was planted 2 full meters inside my property line. That's when I decided I wasn't going to play nice anymore. I grabbed my phone, took pictures of the sign from every angle, zoomed in on the HOA logo, and filed everything neatly into a folder labeled Evidence Karen. Later that evening, I knocked on Karen's door. She opened it with that same fake smile. "Hello, neighbor," she chirped. I held up the photo on my phone. "You know anything about this?" Her smile twitched. "Oh, that?" The board probably put it up to avoid confusion. "We wouldn't want visitors trespassing, would we?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "Visitors aren't the problem, Karen. Trespassers are." Her smile disappeared entirely then. She didn't have a response, just crossed her arms and said, "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "No," I replied, calm but firm. "You're making it illegal." And then I walked away. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, looking out at the lake reflecting the moonlight, wondering how far she'd go. I wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly I was disappointed. I'd bought this land to find peace, not to fight with someone who measured her self-worth by imaginary borders. Still, something inside me shifted that night. The quiet kind of resolve that builds when you realize someone is testing your patience just to see how much you'll take. I decided that from then on, every word, every visit, every incident would be recorded. No shouting matches, no drama. Just documentation. If Karen wanted a boundary dispute, she was going to get one, but it would be fought on paper with facts, not emotion. Because I knew one thing for sure. When someone like her picks a fight with peace, they never expect peace to fight back. After that first boundary clash, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd get the message. But if anything, it seemed to fuel her. Karen wasn't just nosy. She was strategic, the kind of person who didn't argue to win. She argued to dominate. At first, it was small things. A couple of HOA members walking near my fence pretending to inspect erosion by the lake. A car that would idle just across from my driveway whenever I was working outside. And then came the letters. The first one was almost funny. It was printed on HOA letterhead, with the header, Notice of Non-Compliance. Wasn't even in their HOA. The letter claimed, "My dock did not meet community aesthetic standards and that I needed to submit renovation plans for approval." I laughed out loud. Approval from them? I wasn't paying dues, signing contracts, or part of their neighborhood covenant. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. The second one, though, hit different. It came with a fine. $250 for unauthorized shoreline alteration. Apparently, my recent landscaping work violated HOA water protection guidelines. That's when I realized this wasn't incompetence. It was harassment, was with paperwork. I walked over to Karen's house that afternoon. She was in her garden, pruning flowers like a suburban queen. "Hey," I called out, holding up the letter. "Care to explain this?" She didn't even look surprised. "Oh, that." "Yes, we noticed some changes to the lakefront and—" I cut her off. "Karen, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not part of your HOA." She smiled, slow, deliberate, like she was about to enjoy the argument. "Well, technically, all properties surrounding the lake fall under our community's visual guidelines. It's about maintaining uniformity." "Uniformity," I repeated. "This isn't a shopping mall. It's private property." Her tone sharpened. "We'll let the board decide that." That was her favorite phrase, the board. She said it like it was the Supreme Court. Within a week, things escalated. I started hearing whispers around town. People mentioning that I was causing issues by the lake. Even the hardware store clerk gave me that awkward, hesitant look when I came in. Turns out Karen had been talking. "She's telling everyone you're neglecting the shoreline," he said. "That you're dumping stuff into the water." I laughed, but deep down it got under my skin. Not because I cared what they thought, but because I knew exactly what she was doing. Karen wasn't trying to win legally. She was trying to isolate me socially. Classic HOA warfare. Pressure, gossip, and fake fines. Then came the day I spotted her with binoculars. I was on my porch, just watching the water, when I caught a glint of sunlight from across the fence. I looked closer. There she was, standing on her deck, staring straight at my dock through binoculars. I waved. She froze for half a second, then quickly pretended to be looking at birds. I couldn't help but laugh. It was absurd, but also unnerving. From that day on, it was constant surveillance. If I so much as stepped outside, her blinds would twitch. If I mowed the lawn, she'd walk her dog past. Just to make sure you're keeping things tidy, she'd comment on everything. The grass looks a bit long today. You really should use HOA-approved paint. You're not supposed to park that truck near the water. Every remark was dipped in sugar, but you could taste the poison underneath. I decided to document everything. Photos, timestamps, copies of every letter, every petty violation notice. I even installed cameras. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted proof. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story later. And the more I stayed calm, the more it seemed to bother her. She needed a reaction. A burst of anger, something to label me as the aggressive new guy. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I smiled, waved, and kept my cool. Because people like her, they crumble when you deny them control. Then came the HOA community notice. A brightly colored flyer slid under my door one morning. It read, "Lake Maintenance Schedule. Residents must refrain from dock usage during approved HOA inspections." And at the bottom, in bold print, "Failure to comply may result in fines or property restrictions." That's when I decided, enough. I took a deep breath, walked down to the dock, and nailed a new sign right above the waterline. It said simply, "Private property. Trespassers will be reported." And below that, in smaller print, "Not part of any HOA." I stood there looking at it, proud. A small act of defiance. But it felt good, because the moment that sign went up, I knew exactly what would happen next. Karen wasn't going to back down. She was going to lose her mind, and this time I was going to be ready for it. It was a Saturday morning, calm, bright, and the kind of quiet that makes you forget people like Karen even exist. The lake shimmered like glass, the air smelled of pine, and I remember thinking, maybe things are finally settling down. I brewed my coffee, stepped outside, and froze. Something looked off near the dock. From a distance, it almost blended in. But as I walked closer, my stomach dropped. Empty beer cans littered the boards. A broken chair floated upside down in the shallows. And one of the dock planks, the one I just replaced, was cracked clean through. For a moment, I just stood there, staring. The anger came slow, like a storm building on the horizon. Then it hit all at once. I scanned the ground. Muddy footprints, cigarette butts, tire marks near the path. Whoever had been there hadn't just visited. They'd partied. I turned to check my camera footage. The motion sensor had picked something up at 11:47 p.m. the night before. When I opened the file, I couldn't believe what I saw. There she was, Karen, in her robe, drink in hand, waving her arms while a few people laughed behind her. They were dragging a cooler, setting up chairs right on my dock. Her husband, red baseball cap, smug grin, popped open a beer and tossed the cap into the water. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate invasion. I replayed the video twice just to make sure I wasn't overreacting. Nope, clear as day. Trespassing, vandalism, and arrogance caught in high definition. By noon, I was at Karen's front door, video queued up on my phone. She opened it, pretending surprise. "Oh, you again. Everything okay?" I held up the screen. "Recognize this?" Her face tightened for half a second before she forced a laugh. "Oh, come on. We were just having a little gathering. Everyone in the HOA uses that dock." "That dock," I said evenly, "is on my property." She crossed her arms. "Well, it's connected to our lake. We maintain it technically." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You trespassed on private land, damaged property, and littered in the water. That's not maintenance, that's vandalism." Her tone shifted instantly. "You really want to make this ugly?" "Because I can call the HOA board right now, and they'll—" "Karen," I interrupted. "Call whoever you want. But next time I'll be calling the sheriff." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no script. That night, the HOA president came knocking. A tall man in a golf polo, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself politely, but I could feel the tension dripping from every word. I heard there's been a misunderstanding, he said. No misunderstanding, I replied. Karen and her guests trespassed. I have video proof. He sighed, as if the evidence was an inconvenience. Well, perhaps the boundaries aren't as clear as they could be. We'd like to review the property lines before anyone files. Unnecessary reports. I smiled, in the kind of smile that hides a storm. Already did, twice, with a licensed surveyor. You're welcome to see the maps. He didn't take them. He just nodded stiffly and left with a promise to discuss it internally. That's HOA talk, for we'll try to bury this. The next few days were quiet, but not peaceful. I'd catch glimpses of Karen pacing her porch, talking loudly on the phone, gesturing toward my property. A couple of HOA members came by to check lake levels. They didn't say a word, just glared. It was like living beside a nest of hornets pretending to be a garden club. So I made a decision. No more warnings, no more polite talks. If they wanted to play legal games, I'd bring legal firepower. I called a local attorney, a calm-spoken man who dealt with HOA disputes for years. He reviewed my documents, property maps, and the footage. Then he looked up at me and said, "You've got them. Every inch of that shoreline is yours." He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "If you really want to send a message, put up a clear, lawful barrier. Make it visible. Make it permanent. A fence?" I asked. He nodded. "Exactly. You're well within your rights. Just follow code, file the notice, and let them try to argue with paperwork instead of rumors." For the first time in weeks, I felt relief. Not victory yet, just the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards. That night, I stood by the water under a full moon, the lake glimmering like silver glass. The broken chair, the litter, the chaos, it was all gone. But the memory wasn't. People like Karen mistake silence for surrender. They see patience as weakness, but I wasn't being patient anymore. I was planning, because if she wanted to blur the line between her HOA fantasy and my reality, I was about to draw that line so clearly she'd never cross it again. When you're dealing with people like Karen, the worst thing you can do is fight on their level. They thrive on chaos, on gossip, on getting a reaction, so I gave her nothing. Not a glare, not a word. Just silence. But while she was busy talking, I was busy building. My first stop was the county zoning office. I walked in with my property deed, survey documents, and video evidence all neatly organized in a folder. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses and sharper instincts, flipped through my papers, nodding slowly. "You've got every legal right to put up a fence," she said finally. "Just make sure it follows code. Height limit, material type, and distance from the water line. You follow this and no HOA can touch it." That was all I needed to hear. I filed the permit that same afternoon. By the time Karen realized what was happening, the paperwork was already processed and approved. Over the next few days, I started preparing the land. Measuring, marking boundaries, clearing brush. Each hammer tap, each stake in the ground felt like a statement. I'm not going anywhere. From across the lake, I could feel her eyes on me. The HOA houses were perched just high enough to see over the tree line. I could almost hear the collective gasp ripple through their pristine neighborhood when the first contractor truck arrived. By noon, Karen was outside, pacing along her yard, phone glued to her ear. I didn't have to hear the words to know the tone. Sharp, clipped, furious. 5 minutes later, her husband came marching over, puffed up like he was walking into battle. "Hey," he barked, "what's this fence about? You can't just start building things that block our view." I turned slowly, wiping sweat from my forehead. "It's not blocking your view. It's marking my property," he scoffed. "You don't own the view. We pay HOA dues that I cut him off, and I pay taxes for this land." Big difference. He stepped closer, trying to tower over me. "You think you can just wall off part of the lake?" I smiled. "Not wall off, just define what's mine." His jaw clenched. "Karen's gonna make sure the HOA files a complaint. She can file whatever she likes," I said, calmly tapping my folder. "But I already filed first. With the county. Legally approved, fully documented. You're welcome to check." That was the moment he realized the trap wasn't emotional. It was bureaucratic. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just had proof. The following week, construction began. The crew worked fast, professional, clean, efficient. They dug post holes along the exact boundary line, set concrete bases, and installed tall wooden panels spaced evenly apart. The fence didn't just divide land, it divided control. Every slam of a post was another nail in the coffin of her authority. Karen watched the whole thing unfold from her patio, arms crossed, jaw tight. Sometimes she'd shout something, "You can't do that," or "We'll see about this." But I never looked up, because the truth was, the more she yelled, the more ridiculous she looked. On the fourth day, I came home to find a notice taped to my fence post, an HOA violation report. It accused me of unauthorized structural alteration, affecting community aesthetic value. I actually laughed out loud. I walked inside, scanned the document, and sent it straight to my lawyer. His response came back minutes later. HOA has no jurisdiction outside their plat. Ignore it. So I did. By the end of the week, the fence was complete, smooth, solid, and perfectly aligned with the legal survey. On my side, peace. On hers, fury. But here's the best part. Once the fence went up, her property line revealed something she hadn't realized before. The HOA's communal dock, the one she'd used to host her parties, technically extended 2 feet over into my land, and I had the documentation to prove it. My lawyer smiled when he saw the maps. "You don't even need to sue. Just send them a notice of encroachment. It'll hit them harder than any fine." So I did exactly that. Karen's meltdown that day? Oh, it was legendary. Screaming, slamming doors, calling an emergency HOA meeting. The entire board showed up in panic mode, but no amount of shouting could erase the truth. They'd built on my land, and that's when the real shift happened. For the first time, they were the ones playing defense. Karen's reign of control cracked under the weight of her own arrogance, and I was just getting started. The day after the encroachment notice arrived, you could feel it in the air, tension thick enough to cut. Even the lake seemed quieter, like nature itself was holding its breath. By 9 a.m., the HOA's emergency meeting was already in full swing. You could hear Karen's voice echoing across the water before you even saw her. That woman didn't need a megaphone. Her ego carried the volume for her. "She can't do this," she shouted, pacing the patio like a general losing a battle. "That fence violates community harmony. It's an eyesore. It ruins property values." One of the board members mumbled something back, but she cut him off instantly. "Don't tell me to calm down, Bill. You're supposed to enforce HOA rules, not let random lake squatters take over half our view." I sat on my dock, sipping coffee, pretending to read a book. But really, I was watching the show unfold through my sunglasses. The Karen drama hour, living unscripted. Moments later, she stormed across the property line again, hands flailing. "You can't just build this. You have to take it down," she yelled. I didn't even look up. "Already approved by the county. Legally documented. Want me to email you a copy again?" She jabbed a finger toward the fence. "It's ruining the neighborhood aesthetic." I finally looked up. "Funny, I think it improves it." Her jaw dropped. "You're mocking me," I smiled. "Just appreciating good craftsmanship. That did it." She turned beet red, spun around, and stormed back toward her house, muttering things I probably couldn't repeat on camera. By evening, new flyers appeared on HOA mailboxes. Urgent community meeting, illegal construction alert. I almost laughed out loud. Karen was waging a full propaganda campaign now. The next day, 3 HOA members came by, clipboards in hand, taking photos of the fence like they were gathering evidence for a criminal trial. I greeted them politely, offered coffee. They declined. The irony? Every photo they took only proved my fence was perfectly within the boundary lines. That night, my lawyer sent a friendly follow-up letter to the HOA board. "Please note, any further attempts to harass or interfere with construction on my client's property will constitute legal trespass. Kindly govern yourselves accordingly." Translation: back off or pay for it, but Karen didn't back off. Oh no. She went nuclear. The next morning I woke to the sound of shouting again, only this time she wasn't yelling at me. She was yelling at the HOA board members on her own porch. "You said this would be handled," she screamed. "You said you'd make him take it down." One of them tried to reason with her. "Karen, the documents are clear. His land, his rights. We can't fight this, her voice cracked. You're all useless. I built this community. I made it perfect. And now it's being ruined by one man with a fence. I could hear every word, and I'll be honest, it was hard not to smile. Then came the breaking point. That afternoon, I caught her standing right at the fence line with a can of spray paint. Bright red. She was about to vandalize the panels when I stepped outside, camera rolling. Smile for the footage, Karen, I said calmly. She froze, mid-spray. You can't film me. She barked. I tilted my head. On my property? I absolutely can. Her face twisted with panic. She dropped the can and stomped away, realizing just how bad it would look. HOA president caught vandalizing private property on video. Within 48 hours, the fallout began. The HOA board called a private meeting. No public notes, no Karen speeches. Rumor had it they were voting to remove her as chair. When the results came out, it was official. Karen was suspended indefinitely pending review. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just stood by my fence that evening, watching the sun set over the lake, and let the silence do the talking. For the first time since I'd moved there, it actually felt like home. But the best part came a week later. A letter arrived in the mail from the HOA. Not a fine, not a threat, an apology. Signed by the new interim president, they admitted fault, acknowledged the encroachment, and confirmed they'd be relocating their communal dock entirely off my property line. When I read it, I couldn't help but laugh softly. After all the yelling, threats, and drama, it ended the same way it began, with paperwork. Karen, though, she didn't take it well. Word spread that she'd been caught on video shouting at board members, blaming outsiders for ruining her legacy. A few weeks later, her for sale sign went up. When the moving truck finally rolled away, I stood by my fence and waved. Not out of spite, but out of closure. Sometimes victory isn't loud. It's quiet. It's peaceful. Standing on your own land by your own lake, knowing no one can take it from you again. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the lake gold, I whispered to myself, peace and paperwork, the ultimate revenge. The lake was quiet again. Truly quiet. The kind of silence that feels alive, almost like it's breathing. The fence stood tall and straight, perfectly aligned with the survey markers. A visible line that reminded everyone where boundaries began and ended. I walked along it one morning, coffee in hand, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace. Karen was gone. Her house had been sold to a family who didn't care about power struggles or HOA politics. The HOA itself had shifted. They were quieter, more cautious, and in a way, wiser. I hadn't wanted chaos, but sometimes it has a way of teaching lessons faster than calm ever could. I took a long walk around my property, watching the water ripple under the rising sun. The dock was intact, the shoreline pristine, and not a trace of the drama remained. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what I had worked for, asserting my right to peace and standing firm without losing my own composure. In reflection, I realized the biggest challenge hadn't been the HOA, the fines, or even Karen's relentless harassment. The challenge had been myself. Patience, strategy, and calm resolve had been my strongest allies. Every document I collected, every photo I took, every legal consultation I pursued wasn't just about protecting property. It was about protecting my peace of mind. Karen's meltdown, while satisfying to witness in retrospect, was never my goal. My goal was clarity. I needed a line between their chaos and my life, literally and metaphorically. The fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was a statement, a physical proof that boundaries exist for a reason and that they must be respected. It struck me then that this wasn't just about property lines. It was about personal lines, the limits we draw to protect ourselves, our families, and our sanity. When someone tries to cross them, it's not weakness to stand firm, it's courage. I leaned against the fence and watched the morning sun dance on the water. Peace had returned not because Karen had left, not because the HOA finally acknowledged the boundaries, but because I had chosen to enforce them calmly, firmly, and legally. That's when it hit me. Sometimes the strongest victories are the quietest ones, and as I sipped my coffee and listened to the soft lapping of the lake, I thought about the lesson I wanted anyone watching this story to understand. Peace isn't passive. Boundaries aren't mean-spirited. And sometimes standing your ground with patience, preparation, and clarity will do more than anger, yelling, or retaliation ever could. Karen had tried to rewrite reality to suit her entitlement. The HOA had tried to shield her. But facts, proof, and calm resolve? They always win. The lake was mine. The fence was mine. And for the first time in months, the calm wasn't threatened by anyone. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't in chaos. It's in living your life uninterrupted, on your terms with peace intact. And that, I realized, is worth more than any victory over someone like Karen.